Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective. Let's dissect the Larry Elder's interview on the Breakfast Club, which I am entitling Never Bring Ignorance to a Debate. Now, before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. The Breakfast Club, if you are not aware of who they are an urban, I'm going to say in the area of hip hop, social media, talk show, along the lines of Howard Stern, but to a black hip hop urban area, I would guess. I don't really follow them. I know who they are. And every now and then, when you have interviews such as Larry Elder's, it piques my interest, so I kind of tune in, as well as other interviews. But of late, they have been reaching out, inviting certain candidates to come on their show. So Larry Elders, and more recently too, Vivek Ramaswamy, both who are conservatives, running for president against Donald Trump. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that they're choosing to reach out to black audiences, such as the Breakfast Club. I'm not for sure if other conservatives are inviting people like Larry Elder and Vivek Ramaswamy on their shows. Now, I'm saying this because when I use the title "Never Bring Ignorance to a Debate," part of me inclined to believe that one of the reasons why Larry Elders would come on a show like the Breakfast Club, because he knows they're not equipped to respond to his information, his stats, and that they're going to respond pretty much in and I'm going to say typical black liberal way. And that's what happened on the show. They did it, or as far as the Breakfast Club is concerned, they did it the same with Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, the show is hosted by Charlemagne the God and then DJ Envy. The woman on the right, I think her name is Tizan, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing her name. I don't mean to do so, but she sort of brings sort of the commentary, and I'm going to say more should be thoughtful commentary. But when it comes to dealing with people like Larry Elders, people like Vivek Ramaswamy, she's been missing the mark, and I'm being kind here. In interviews like this, they're not equipped. They don't know how to handle when you ask them certain facts. Most people are not, in all fairness. Christians, for example, are not equipped to defend the Bible. They're just not. And if you kind of shoot stats at them, they don't know how to handle it. Well, the same here. And so the interview turns contentious, as opposed to when Larry spews out some of the nonsense that he does. Instead of counteracting, you kind of you respond to me with silly arguments. And we're gonna dissect this. I'm gonna do it in several parts. Let me show you one other clip here. That's not a clip, but this picture here. And here's the thing: depending on what side you fall on, if you're conservative, then you agree with this. Elders 100% destroys the left claim that racism is the problem. And we're going to deal a lot with this, because that's why I'm going to deal with it in certain parts. And we're going to look at his, when you think about Larry Elders as a black conservative, and he's going to speak and represent what a lot of black conservatives, their positions, how they speak. truthfully, it's hard for me to believe that he believed a lot of the nonsense he spews out. And as we go through and you hear some of the stuff that he is saying, they're typical conservative talking points. The question is, why does he and other black conservatives, why do they speak this stuff? Now think about this. He's going to echo this saying here that racism is not a problem. So why would a black man say something like that? My opinion, they have a right audience. And even though he's on a black show that reaches a black audience, understand that they're speaking to white audience. He's able to go back and say, look how they think. He'll call them the left. He'll call them liberal. So in other words, yes, it was a win for Larry. Now, to be clear, he was on the show as a candidate running for the presidency against Donald Trump, in which he will never speak against Donald Trump. He would never say the problems that Donald Trump created. Same thing with Vivek Ramaswamy. Both of them, and Larry and Vivek are in the same boat. They're never going to win the presidency. Neither one is going to win. Vivek is rising in the polls. Larry is not. And pretty much every office that Larry has been running for, he loses miserably. So I think the reason why they do run is to, my opinion, to get a seat at the table. So if you go back to Trump's first election, look at some of the people that ran against him ended up having seats at the table. Not all, like Chris Christie and some of the other people know, but Ben Carson got a seat at the table. And he actually got, why? Why would Ben Carson get a seat? Why would he hire Ben Carson? So the point is that I think from a long term that maybe they are jockeying for, some kind of place, even though that place is never going to take place, because personally I do not believe that Trump is going to win. Now, without a doubt, Trump is going to garner a large part of the Republican. He's dominating the Republican Party. He's dominating even the evangelical Christian vote. Okay? But that's not enough that's going to get him across the finish line. But so Larry is out here in typical conservative fashion spewing the talking points. And what you're going to see is that Breakfast Club are not equipped to deal with that. But I'm going to break down his so-called stats. I'm going to break down his talking points and dissect them. So let's get into it.
It's an honor.
How you feeling?
I feel good.
He does more than that, though. I mean, he was a radio host.
Radio host for 40 years.
Author, TV host.
Author,
New York
host.
Times best-selling list. I've got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Corner of Hollywood and Vine, Southeast corner, just saying.
Okay.
I didn't know you had a star on Hollywood.
Now, I'm going to say that is an accomplishment for Larry to have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame on the corner of Hollywood and Vine. That's an accomplishment, okay? If you ever been on Hollywood Boulevard and you see where they have the star's name, Larry should have been 3 blocks away, but okay.
Walk of Fame,
Yeah,
man.
yeah, about a handful of radio guys do, and I'm one of them.
Yeah, I think it's you, Elvis Duran,
Angie
Howard
Martinez.
Stern,
Yeah.
Big Boy. Oh,
Angie
Angie Martinez.
A guy named Arthur Godfrey.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's jump right into it. Why are you running for president?
Well, I'm running as an America First mega guy, and we have an America First mega guy running, obviously. So the question is, what do you bring to the table?
You said MAGA.
MAGA.
Okay.
And the answer is, I bring a lot of issues to the table that I feel our side is not talking enough about, if at all. For example, the number one social problem in America, by far, is the epidemic not of COVID, but of fatherlessness. 70%.
So let's stop for a moment. He said the number one reason social ill is fatherless. Now, does he mean fatherless? Okay, does he mean fatherless in all America or fatherless in Black Americans? Let's go back here for a moment.
And the answer is I bring a lot of issues to the table that I feel our side is not talking enough about, if at all. For example, the number one social problem in America by far is the epidemic not of COVID, but of fatherlessness. 70% of black kids today enter the world without a father in the home, married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. Now 25% of white kids enter the world today without a father in the home, married to the mother. And the stats are clear. Even Barack Obama once cited them. If you're raised without a dad, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. What's happening?
Let's stop and analyze this now. First, he says, so his numbers, and again, depending on where you're gathering the numbers, and I'll come back to that for a moment. That's important to understand that. He says 78% of black children enter the world without a father in the home. And then he says 28% for white Americans. Okay? Now, I don't know where he's getting his numbers from. Okay? But well, I take that back. I correct myself. You can get these numbers relatively pretty much anywhere. My point here is he focuses on a high number of blacks, but a low number for whites. So how do you take that? So 28%, 78%. But then he's saying that this is the cause of America's problems. Now, actually, the number for whites is a little higher, but I won't dispute him on that. And so in fairness, he says across the board, fatherless homes, and then he says 78% for black Americans. But what he doesn't say is, for example, 69% for Alaskan natives, 68% for, 50% for, 51% for Hispanics. And I'm going to say I believe the number for whites is higher, but like I say, I won't dispute him on that. I'm going to say it's more like 40%. Okay, but I won't dispute him on that. But my point is, what's the point? So I'm gonna back up on it just so you can. There's something I want you to hear him say about this, because we're going to continue on. Here we go.
What's happened? In the mid-'60s, with I think the best of intentions, a Democrat named Lyndon Johnson launched what he called the War on Poverty.
Hold on, I'm going to back up for a moment here. All right.
And the answer is I bring a lot of issues to the table that I feel our side is not talking enough about, if at all. For example, the number one social problem in America by far is the epidemic not of COVID, but of fatherlessness. 70% of black kids today enter the world without a father in the home, married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. Now 25% of white kids enter the world today without a father in the home, married to the mother. And the stats are clear. Even Barack Obama once cited them.
Okay, I want to, before he goes on, let me also bring this point up. That if you say that fatherless, that the mere absence of father, so are you counting the absence of father that's produced from war? Are you counting the absence of father that's produced from, let's say, illnesses? It could be murder, crime, but illnesses too, right? So a lot of people die of illness, cancers and whatever. We can go on. And also, is he counting the absence of father that divorce produced? So here's my point. So if you say that, okay, that just the mere absence of father produces bad society, bad kids, right? I want to know where you're getting your numbers from. How are you judging that? Because this stuff happens all the time. Divorce happens all the time. parents die of illnesses all the time. Now, we haven't had a war. I think, the wars that we have had in the last 20 years, 20, 25 years, yeah, the numbers, it's always too much when you talk about wars. But when you talk about wars such as the Vietnam War, um, World War, World War One and Two, the Civil War, that produced massive numbers, and that produces what? Fatherless homes. So what happened to those societies? What became of those societies? Of course, he's not talking about it. I'm just raising the fact that if you're going to say that, then what is the impact of it? And in fact, divorce is still high in America. You talk about nearly 50% of marriages in divorce. So that produces fatherless homes because most of the kids will stay with the mothers.
If you're raised without a dad, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. What's happened in the
Okay, where are they getting that? How are they collecting that data? 5 times. If you don't have a father, now remember he said that if you don't have a father, you're 5 times likely to end up in jail, commit crimes. I think he said not have a job. Where are you getting that numbers from? It's bogus. Again, if you say just the mere absence of fathers, if just the mere absence produces that. So the problem with his numbers is, where are you grabbing? Where are you counting the people at? And that's kind of the problem. Is that, is it true? Let's go back from him. He said, so he mentioned 70%, 78% of blacks, right, enter the world without a father, and then thus now those blacks are going to be 5 times likely to be criminals, unemployed, losers, right? Just losers. In America, we have something like 350 million Americans. Blacks make up about 13 to 14%. So let's say around 40% of black people in America. Now, is Larry saying that out of the 40% of blacks in America today, that the 40% have an absence of father? 78% of those 40%, the absence of father. And then is he saying, right, that the 40 million blacks, right? I said 40% before, I meant 40 million blacks. But the 40 million blacks, out of that 40 million, if 78% of the 40 million blacks in America, do they commit crime? Are they unemployed? Are they losers? See, the thing is, when you cite the numbers, the problem has always existed where black people are painted as monolithic. So you say the problems with black America. Now, when he talks about whites, he won't talk about whites. He won't talk about whites in that way. He'll talk about a fraction, or this corner of the world or the corner of the country. But he's always careful to say, let's make sure we're not painting all blacks. It's kind of the same like when you talk about cops, right? Well, let's not, not all cops are bad, you know. And that you say that to kind of deflect from how many cops are actually bad. Okay, let's continue.
In the mid 60s, with I think the best of intentions, a Democrat named Lyndon Johnson launched what he called the War on Poverty. And since then, we have incentivized women to marry the government and incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. When I say this to people.
Now, I'm going to stop, and again, let's push back on that. You go back to the 60s. He made a statement here that in the 60s, with the welfare, the social programs of Lyndon Johnson, first of all, they were not created for black people. They were created for poor Americans. Black people, of course, benefited from them. But you also have to ask the question, well, why did black people benefit, or why were they kind of forced, see, into welfare? So that's the question. Were they getting hired? Were job opportunities equal and great for black Americans? How about schools, colleges? Remember, this was the 60s he's talking about. During the 60s, you know, Jim Crow, hoses, dogs being unleashed on black protesters, the segregation, the legalized segregation. He's going to try to dismiss this, but we'll get to that later. So you think about towns, think about the sundown towns, think about neighborhoods where blacks were forced to live. So when you talk about then the black community, so then a small portion of the black community is on welfare. For example, what is the unemployment rate for black Americans? Okay, what is the unemployment rate for black Americans? It's about 5%. In fact, the double-mindedness of Larry, he would brag that Trump, during Trump's term, he brought black unemployment to its lowest point almost in American history, down to like 3%. Well, and today I think it's at 5%. So if unemployment is at, let's say, 5%, that means 95% of African Americans are working. So if 95% of blacks are working, and then 78% of those blacks are born without fathers, or that is that 95% workforce bad blacks, ruin blacks? See, when he talks about, he said that fatherless is worse than the COVID pandemic. Yet, when he wants to tout conservative talking points, he will say that under Trump, black did the work. They prospered the most. So if 95% of blacks are working, what kind of blacks are they? And how does that balance with disparaging them with the 78%? Remember, he said that out of this, because of this high fatherless, that blacks are more likely to not have a job. They're more likely to kill. They're more likely to commit crimes. They're more likely, but yet 95% of blacks are working. Okay, so let me continue.
The pushback I get is, well, there are lots of things that are going on, systemic racism, poverty. Here's the problem. If you look at a young black male aged 10 to 43, that's young to me because I'm 71 years old. A young black man in that demo is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white man, same demo. Young black man, real young, 19 and under, the number one cause of preventable death is homicide, almost always at the hands of another young black male. Same demo for whites, the number one cause of preventable death is unintentional deaths. That includes drug overdoses, automobile accidents, drownings. It's not until they get to number 4 that death is the cause.
I'm going to let Charlemagne ask him a very simple question that I would ask too. It's just that Charlemagne, well, he's going to ask him, well, what do white people do wrong? Okay, we'll get to that. My point is, again, they're not counteracting these stats. But let's go back to what he said right here now. That African Americans are more likely to be killed by African Americans. Well, that's true in every demographic. So 53% of blacks are more likely to be killed by blacks. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me give you the stats right here. So 53% of homicides were committed by African Americans. 41% were by whites. So, in other words, and I'm going to say this sarcastically, so for whites to be the superior race, 41% of homicides were committed by whites, 53 by blacks. So let's kind of go back for a moment now. If blacks make up about 40 million Americans, right? So who's committing the crime? How are you counting the crime? Or 53% of the 40 million blacks committing crime? No. The numbers that they're counting are numbers where you have the high crime communities. Gang, drugs, like that, right? And what's even more interesting is that you can't buy a gun in the black community. I live in the Chicago area. I live 15 minutes from the Indiana border. If I want to buy a gun, I have to go across the border to Indiana. The black neighborhoods, for example, the south side of Chicago, are even farther, right? More like 20 to 30 minutes from the Indiana border. But I want you to understand that he's not talking about the 41% of whites that are committing homicide. Now, he also talks about unintentional. Well, first of all, it's still crime when you talk about the opioid epidemic that in 1 year alone wiped out 60,000 Americans on opioid overloads. There were crimes committed because these drugs were illegally dispensed, and especially to areas such as Ohio and West Virginia. You know, how did these poor whites obtain this high quantity of opioids where they could overdose over? See, the problem is that, again, each community, you're going to have the same kind of problems within the community. Now, the black community, without a doubt, have higher rates. For example, black communities, and then within the black communities, where the high crime rate happens, gang and drug infested, they're the higher rate probably than any other demographic for gun shootings. But you have to ask the question, as I told you before, there are no gun manufacturers in the hood. So where are they getting the guns? And then why are these crimes happening at such high rates? And I'll tell you this, they happen at such high rate because, one, it's tolerated. That's why. When you look at solving the crime in black Americas, you can look on the news, right? And they'll tell you almost every night in the news, 8-year-old boy shot, 15-year-old boy shot, homicide shot, 5 people shot, 3 people dead. And they'll show the news. You see the police that show up after these deaths, enforcers. They set up, they stand around talking. They got tape around, standing around talking, but they don't solve the crime. They only solve the crime if it's a high-profile crime. For example, a few months ago, there was a promising police officer, black female officer, who was just a week away from receiving her master's degree. She was gunned down senselessly and violently by young black thugs who were just robbing her. Within 2 days, they had him in custody. The vast majority of the crimes that are committed in these black communities, in these communities, they go unsolved. Now, why is that? Well, the police don't care about solving them. That's why. So, what he's talking about here, he's parsing his numbers. And what happens Another thing that happens is that the black community gets painted with a one wide brush, whereas you break up everything else. Like you never hear him talk about the white community the way he talks about the black community. When he says to 78%, yeah, 78% of what number? The homicides of what number? Me and Larry grew up. I lived in South Central. I grew up in the suburb outside of St. Louis. My parents are from a town called Kinloch in Missouri, where there are high homicide rates. In Kinloch, which was a all-black town, and the reason why, because you go back to the history of Kinloch, and back in the early start of the century, blacks could not live in some of the surrounding areas, so they were forced in these towns. Just like in small southern towns, you have blacks that live on the other side of the tracks, usually, right? The black side of town. And I'll get to that later, whereas, yeah, there's no racism there, but anyway. So when you talk about a community, okay, remember I said you have 90%, 95% of the black community working. That's what? Anywhere from service workers to multimillionaires, right? Lower middle class, upper middle class to wealthy. You have that all in one in the black community. So again, Larry paints, along with other conservatives and white conservatives, they paint the black community always as one. When he says the fatherless home is ruining the black community, what black community? The same problems that have always plagued poor areas. Now I'll get more into that in the next video. I'm going to pick it up in part 2 of Don't Bring Ignorance to a Debate. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. See you in part 2.